So we did a brief overview of the George Floyd case that was supposed to start today with jury selection, but it ended up getting postponed because reinstating the third-degree murder charge is chief among the priorities of the prosecution right now. And the judge has been forced to reconsider his initial stance that was just going to get thrown out, because as you can see here, and it feels so nice to use the Wall Street Journal, I feel so smart, but I'm also not going to pay for his subscriptions, and we only really need the first couple of lines anyways, because that's not the point of this. We are looking at the jury questionnaire, because there's a bunch of stuff in there that is, it's interesting. It's very interesting to find. Jury selection in the murder trial of former police officer, of the former police officer. Yes, he didn't die. He's still very much alive. Accused of killing George Floyd was on hold Monday after prosecutors filed for a delay pending an appeal to the Minnesota Supreme Court over an additional charge of third-degree murder. They're just trying to push this out for as long as possible. It wasn't immediately clear how quickly the Minnesota Court of Appeals would take to consider the motion to delay the start of the high-profile case, which has brought tight security measures and protesters to downtown Minneapolis, just stoking that powder keg, which is liable to burst regardless of how this ends, really, okay, because there's two narratives that's going to be spun at the end of this. You can already figure them out, but I'll just lay out my perspective on it. Okay, let's just say the Chauvin gets the entire book thrown at him. He goes away for whatever, rest of his time, the rest of his kids' time, and their kids' time. He ends up rotting in some Minneapolis supermax. And what will that say? What will Keith Ellison, Attorney General of Minnesota, he'll come out and say, that right there is proof that there are racist police officers out there. That right there, we pin the man who is responsible for sparking all of the racial unrest to come to the surface, and that which you guys so vociferously expressed over the previous year. And that right there is proof that there are racists in every police department across this country, and we need to find them all and hold them accountable, because now the judiciary is on our side and we are going after them full force. I hope that's not the case. That is not likely, because in my opinion, the prosecution has vastly overplayed their hand, and this is going to result in, like it or not, it's going to result in an acquittal, because the facts just don't bore them out, and I shan't go over everything that I proffered my opinion on before. Finally got the thumbnail put on there, and you can see that video. I'll have it linked if it hasn't been linked already above. But in the highly likely case of the acquittal, here's what the narrative is, and you guys can probably already figure this out yourself. It's going to look exactly the same. That right there, Keith Ellison will say at the end of the day, is obvious proof that the judiciary is racist. We know the police departments are staffed with racists running around killing unarmed black men who didn't do nothing, and that justice has not been served. Instead, there is white supremacy everywhere that protects the police, just like with their qualified immunity, just protects them regardless, and black people will die. People of color will continue to perish at the feet and knees of police officers until we do something, and they won't be held accountable for that inciting language, and therefore I will wait to be right after this is over, sometime in the summer probably, whenever peak riding time is. But that still holds out and still holds true, that regardless of how this case ends, it's going to result in riots. It just depends on how long, how many people are involved, and what direction they're going to be taking. But we need to know, okay, because this is going to be jury selection, and that's a very delicate process. It's something that, some lawyers think that they're good at. They think that they're a good judge of character, and then as soon as somebody takes a stand and absolutely either falls apart or flips on them, they're left dumbfounded, putting their trust in somebody who, was never worth their trust to begin with. So people make a pretty penny off of the ability to pick the correct jurors for this situation. Now, if you're the prosecution, in my estimation, you would want an all-black, all-female jury, okay? They're going to be incredibly sympathetic. Like, even just take a look at the Wall Street Journal's picture there. Like, okay, of the people that I can see, there's one cuck, one person of color, probably black guy. I think that's a woman in the middle. There's a kid, obviously, with a woman probably, as well as single mother, and then some fat Asian. They're all going to be incredibly sympathetic to that cause. Now, if you're the defense team, what are you going to want? You're probably going to want older white men. Let's be fair, people who are going to have a healthy skepticism of prosecutors, but at the same time be supportive of the police department. That right there screams older man. It could even be older people of color, but at the same time, you're going to want older white men. That's just how it shakes out if you're looking at it purely demographically. But what are the questions that are being asked? Because the juror questionnaire has been leaked out there, and we're going to go through some of the questions because it's weird, right? But a lot of these questions make sense, okay? Because you got your first question here. Is it important for the parties to know all the details you remember about these events? The case, George Floyd, the defendants, Derek Chauvin, To Tao, J. Alexander Kwang, and Thomas Lane. Please take your time to search your memory and provide an account of what you recall, what you had heard or seen in the media. Now, they give you an entire page if you were a juror to fill it out, because obviously there's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of misconception. There's a lot of people who don't even know the name of the police officer, Derek Chauvin, let alone the 3 additional police officers that are on there as well. People know one thing about George Floyd, and if they're sticking to the media, they're going to know one thing. If they've done a little bit of research, they're going to know another. And if they follow this stuff as closely as you and I do, it's going to look a hell of a lot different. So that's important, okay? That's going to be the first qualifier, hence why it's the first question. So obviously you want to know who and what is known about what and who. From what you have seen, read, or heard, you have what are your general impressions of the defendants? Negative, somewhat negative, neutral, somewhat positive, very positive, or other. And please explain your answers. Obviously beneficial to know for both parties. From what have you seen, read, or heard? Do you have your general impression of George Floyd? So they're going to want to know where you got your information, which will once again be very beneficial. Do you or someone close to you have any direct or indirect connections to these events? Check yes if you want to be on the defendant's side. Check no if you want to be on, or rather, sorry, I screwed that up. Check yes if you want to be on George Floyd's side. Check no if you want to be on Derek Chauvin's side. Have you ever watched video of George Floyd's death on the news or the internet? If yes, how many times have you seen the video of the incident in whole or in part? In part is what the media got. In whole is the much longer one where he's in the vehicle. You can see him ingesting the fentanyl and then spurging out until he eventually checks out on TV or on the internet. Fire up your 56K modem. 1 time, 2 to 3 times, 4 to 5 times, 6 or more times. You would have to be a psychopath to go back and watch what is, for all intents and purposes, a snuff film, because Buddy does check out at the end of it, so I don't know. Have you ever talked about George Floyd's death to your family, friends, or coworkers, or discussed it online, for example, on social media? I think literally everybody has at this point, okay, in some frame or fashion. If yes, what opinions have you expressed? They should give you an entire page for that one, obviously. Number 7. Did you or someone close to you participate in any of the demonstrations or marches against police brutality that took place in Minneapolis after George Floyd's death? Now, this is specific to Minneapolis because that's where the trial has taken place, but just put yourself in those boots as well if you were in a city or if you were in a county that also had additional Black Lives Matter protests, marches, riots, ceremonial burnings, whatever you want to call them. Once again, that's another one of those clear questions where it kind of divides you down the lines of, oh, okay, are you going to be on the side of the defense or the plaintiff? Very cut and dry. Did you or someone you know get injured or suffer any property damage during the protests that took place during George Floyd's death? Specifically, if you're a business owner in downtown, do you believe your community has been negatively or positively affected by the protests that have taken place in the Twin Cities area since George Floyd's death? Yes, that should be a very, very, very easy question. It has affected all of society around the world. No matter what you have heard or seen about the case, and no matter what opinions you might have formed, can you put all of those aside and decide this case only on the evidence you receive in court, follow the law, and decide the case in a fair and impartial manner? Because if you can, you probably will be voting for acquittal. Media habits. This is where you get a lot of helpful information, okay? This is the stuff where if somebody's shy about disclosing their political affiliation, which was not so much a hallmark in the early 2000s based on which way you would go on a specific trial, but now if you're anywhere right of Stalin, your name gets put on a list and you're next for execution. So there's a lot of undercover people that just want to lay low and not have to engage in this type of behavior. And once again, if you're stupid enough to pull jury duty and can't get out of it even though you want to, you're quite likely to fall for some of these questions that are on here. So number 1 of part 2. What is your primary source of news? I would shit a bug with a bell on it if somebody put Don Consuelo. How often do you read a hard copy or online version of a newspaper? Every goddamn day. I'm sorry about that. What newspaper do you regularly read? Podcasts do you regularly listen to? See how in-depth they get on this stuff? Like, this is a lot more than the dramatized and glamorized Hollywood depiction of jury selection, which growing up I watched a fair amount of B-level procedural court shows. It's not Samuel L. Jackson yelling, "Yes, they deserve to die, and I hope they burn in hell." It's not quite that dramatic. It's more or less, what local radio or television news station do you listen to or watch the most? Whatever channel Big Bang Theory's on. What social media platforms do you use regularly, if any? How often do you see a local news or news related updated on social media, such as sites as Facebook or Twitter? So if you're likely to be a heavy Twitter user, you are also probably likely to have rainbow colored hair and would immediately be disqualified or not submitted forth by the defense team. Police contacts. Now this is going to be very, very, very important for the defense and for the plaintiffs as well, but mostly for the defense. The defendants in this case were police officers of the Minneapolis Police Department. Is there anything about their employment in the Minneapolis Police Department that would prevent you from rendering a fair and impartial verdict in the case? Number 2, do you have regular contact with any law enforcement agencies, employees, or officers through your work, your neighborhood, or your social life? Have you or someone close to you ever helped support or advocate in favor of or against police reform? Were you out there marching this summer with a defund the police banner? Is mostly what they want to know. Have you or someone close to you ever been arrested for a crime? If yes, how did the police handle the arrest? Which I couldn't imagine anybody's going to have an impartial remembering remembering. It's not a term, not a grammatically correct one, of that situation. So I don't know if you're going to be basing your opinion on this section on one question. I would stray away from that one. Have you or someone close to you ever been the victim of a crime where the police were called? I think literally everybody's probably had some kind of an interaction with police officers. So were you satisfied or unsatisfied with how the police responded? The various different shades. Have you ever personally seen the police use more force than was needed? They should have been a little bit more descriptive on that, because I think you can pull up a police brutality or even just some dash cam footage, and depending on your predisposition or your temperament, you might think that the police officer was being a little bit lippier than he needs to, and you might consider that force. Some people believe that words are violence because they're dumb and dropped out of middle school. So you should have been a little bit more specific. Have you ever been restrained or put in a chokehold, for example, by law enforcement or during a self-defense class? It's interesting how they're trying to blur those lines, because the training of police officers is way different than if you're going to be going to learn karate from a grandmaster or roll with the Gracies. Like, I don't know where they teach knee in the neck, but that is also not the first thing that comes out of the tool belt of a police officer, so I would find that highly unlikely. We're just going to go rapid fire through these ones. Discrimination is not as bad as the media makes it out to be. Blacks and other minorities do not receive equal treatment as whites in the criminal justice system, and all of these are on a 1 to 5 scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Another telling one that you can just run down the page, and it's like one's closer to 1 and one's closer to 5 is going to depend on which side you're going to fall on. Obviously, you should be able to parse that out by the questions given. The police in this county treat whites and blacks equally. The police in my community make me feel safe. I support defunding the Minneapolis Police Department. Minneapolis police officers are more likely to respond with force when confronting black suspects than dealing with white suspects. Because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second-guess decisions they make while on duty. The criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities. I do not trust the police. People today do not give our law enforcement officers the respect they deserve. Local police departments try to cover up excessive force rather than correct it. I think that news reports about police brutality against racial minorities is only the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of opinions being presented as fact in this little questionnaire here. Both sides. It's a decent representation of the two most extreme positions of things. And while you might think that an honest juror would probably have no opinion or somewhat disagree, somewhat agree with some of that stuff, if you don't have a strong opinion on here, I would think that this would be one of the things that the council will look at and make their decisions based on how hastily this section was completed. Part 4 of the questionnaire is really needs no going over. It's just more or less marital status, if you've ever been through the education and system, and when did you decide to tap out. But of course, this will be linked in the description if you'd like to go over it as well, but just in the interest of time. So opinions regarding the justice system. This is kind of a retread, so we're just going to go ahead and pick out a couple of different points on it as well. Because as you can see, yeah, do you believe our criminal justice system works? Again, this is another one of those things. It's like, okay, what's your opinion? Do you think that based on different races or immutable characteristics, do you think that somebody gets a fair shake or not? We got it. Under our system of justice, the potential consequences of your verdict, including potential penalty or punishment, must not be in any way affect the jury's decision as to whether or not the prosecution has proven the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Would you have any difficulty following this principle of law? Can you follow instructions from a judge in order to make a fair and unbiased opinion? If you can't, okay, thanks for your time and here's your ham sandwich. Then part 6 is just procedure about being a juror, being a good juror, and if you are able to carry that out. So yeah, all the juicy stuff is definitely up here in the beginning. I would say this right here, the little slide chart, is probably the most important and the biggest predictor on which side do you think the juror might land, but at the same time, I'm also not a jury selection specialist. I know, shocker, right? This is what they're going to be going for when they eventually get to the jury selection process. And like I said a little bit down there, this is supposed to start the official trial itself. Jury selection is going to go through the 26th of this month, and then the trial is supposed to start on the 29th of March and should be going through all of April. So by about Memorial Day, May long weekend in Canada, we should be getting some kind of a blowback from the end of this trial. That's going to suck. But once this does get started, once the judge and the prosecution figures out what the hell to do with the 3rd-degree murder charge that may or may not get reinstituted, I don't think it will be. Who knows? It's probably just a stall tactic. We'll start taking a look at jury selection, see who they go with, see what they go with, see what the temperament of the different counsels are, and then get into the hottest trial since probably OJ, right? And with that said, guys, that wraps up today's bevy of news. And I just wanted to give you a little heads up. Tomorrow is my birthday, okay? And I'm going to be taking the day off. But don't fret. I got 3 videos going up at 2, 4, and 6 tomorrow. And they're going to be kind of thought topics, okay? Ranges a lot, and it's some stuff that has been bouncing around in my head for a while, and stuff that I really enjoyed covering. So you'll notice probably a change in clothes for a couple of the videos, but they're all fairly evergreen topics that might seem to stray away from the breaking news or even just the news cycle that I've been normally covering, and I think it'll be a good change of pace. And even though it's my birthday tomorrow, I'm still going to be working on the health of the channel because I want to make this a success more than I could possibly convey. And I don't want to make this about myself. I would just much rather close this out by thanking the 330 people on YouTube who have subscribed to this channel over the past, God, just about 6 months at this point. I can't thank you all enough, and 150 people over on Rumble. Once again, it got me through a really tough week when YouTube decided to just kick me off for no good reason. I don't trust YouTube to ever do the right thing. Yes, I just thank you all so very, very much. So don't fret. There will be content going up tomorrow because I will not take a day off until I am forced to, until every platform kicks me off of it. I will still be continuing to make content. Your boy just needs to charge his batteries for a day. And no better day than my second favorite day of the year, my birthday. And with that said, I thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.